And welcome again, everybody, to the Perimeter Institute here in Waterloo, Ontario. It is our second program of 3 looking at the priorities in the global conversation about access to energy. Last night, we considered the energy challenges facing Indigenous people who are off the grid here in Canada. Tonight, we're going to go much further afield to what energy poverty means worldwide, as billions of people struggle daily to meet just the most basic energy needs. And joining us for that conversation from near and far tonight are Aaron Leopold. He's a member of the Access Committee of the UN Secretary General's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. Jatin Nathwani, professor and Ontario Research Chair in Public Policy and Sustainable Energy at the University of Waterloo. Hisham Zarifi, professor at the Liu Institute for Global Issues at the University of British Columbia. Kavita Miles, Senior Program Coordinator of the Integrated Sustainable Energy and Ecological Development Association, and Nkiruka Avila, PhD student in the Energy and Resources Group at the University of California at Berkeley. And could we have a lovely Waterloo, Ontario welcome for all our guests here, please? Thank you. Can I, just before we start our conversation, share with you information that you no doubt all know, but with our audience as well, about the fact that despite many decades of effort, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up this information. Globally, 1.1 billion people live without any access to electricity. 1.1 billion, and a further billion have what's called unreliable access. That's almost 1/3 of the people on Earth who do not have access to modern and reliable energy. Now, out of that 1.1 billion people without any access to electricity, here's where they live. 55% of them, more than half, live in sub-Saharan Africa. A little over 1/3 are from South Asia. The other 12% includes Latin America and the Middle East, and this won't surprise you at all. 87% live in rural areas, only 13% in urban areas. And to that end, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has said, energy is the golden thread that connects economic growth, increased social equity, and an environment that allows the world to thrive. Okay, Hisham, has the Secretary General got it right?
Absolutely. If you think about how you use energy in your daily life and think about the opportunities that energy gives you, lighting, refrigeration, cooking, in your home, and then you think about the productive activities that we have, our industries, our commerce, all of that is dependent upon that underlying energy substratum that we live with and that we exploit in order to improve our lives and improve the lives of our children.
Jatin, you agree it all starts with energy?
Oh, absolutely, and it goes straight to the quality of our lives in ways that we in the world where we live cannot actually imagine, because all the things that you think you can do that we take for granted are not accessible to you in a very, very deep and disadvantageous way, whether it is your educational attainment, your ability to work effectively and productively and get a job, and social and health impacts. That just goes on and on. So when he talks of the golden thread, it indeed is the golden thread in ways that we don't appreciate.
The golden thread, and you're from the Golden State. So we should ask you, can you imagine life in Northern California without access to reliable energy?
Not at all. Everything we do in California is related to energy, our education, our healthcare, even in households, the way we cook, the lighting that we use. And being from Nigeria, I experienced both having no electricity growing up in Nigeria for many hours in a day, and now living in California, having electricity 24 hours a day. So I know the differences, and I see the profound differences it makes in my daily life.
What do you think the impact was on Nigeria's ability to be as good as it could be when you didn't have access to that steady, reliable, affordable electricity?
Yeah, Nigeria is a powerhouse in Africa. It's the economic powerhouse of the continent and has made large strides in development. But imagine they've done all of that with very, very little access to energy. So imagine what Nigeria would have done if they had reliable access to electricity. Households in Nigeria only get 3 to 4 hours of electricity every day. So people are relying on costly, expensive, polluting diesel generators. That's very expensive, not only to the economic benefits of the people, but to their health. It's very polluting. So all these developments that Nigeria has done has been on the back of very unreliable electricity. And there's so much that can be done if we have clean, reliable energy to us.
Kavita, you come to us today from India, where you have been involved in electrification projects in rural India. Tell us about some of those projects and what their success means to those communities.
Well, see, for starters, the fact that you get access to energy means you are first exploiting productive sources, and you're giving people really the ability to live a better life. Like my colleagues have echoed, it gives you the access to sanitation, better educational abilities. It does mean even in terms for women, it frees them up from the drudgery of just looking for basic fuels, like it's a very primitive form of energy that they're used to using otherwise, and it just gives you that access to living a better life. And what we have seen really is even health. Your health improves, health services are benefited as well with access to energy. Hospitals in rural India, for instance, we have implemented wind energy and solar energy in hospitals, which otherwise were catering to, say, pregnant women. And imagine in the middle of the night if you lose access to energy and there's a blackout. What does that mean in terms of the health of the mother as well as the child? So definitely very profound implications.
Aaron, before I ask you what I intended to ask you, I want to ask you first about this work that you're involved with the United Nations, the Secretary General's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. What is that?
So the Sustainable Energy for All initiative was born out of the UN Secretary General's own experience growing up in Korea, where he led a childhood which was exactly as was described before around the world, with no access to energy. And basically, he sees this and saw this as a key area where the United Nations could kind of bring together different international organizations, but also the power of the private sector and of the non-governmental organizations. I actually work for Practical Action, which is a nonprofit organization that has been working on energy access for about 40 years. And to bring together these actors to really help bring this issue to the global agenda. I mean, we've talked about energy in the climate change context for now, it's been decades. But actually, energy for development is part and parcel to the energy solution of the 21st century. And if we're talking about renewable energy for climate change, without talking about energy for development, we're going to, miss a huge global humanitarian issue, but we're also not going to kind of deliver on all of the different dividends which we could.
Well, let me follow up on that, because the United Nations, of course, has this list of sustainable development goals. Right. And number 7 on that list is what we're talking about tonight. Yes. And I want you to help us understand how access to reliable energy for people all over the world who don't have it today, how that 7th goal affects the 6 on top of it.
Well, one really important point to make, in addition to what my colleagues here have already mentioned on the golden thread point, is that we have this idea called the water-energy-food nexus, where you have the food that we eat, which requires processing, fertilizer to grow it, everything that you can imagine that goes into bringing the food that you eat to your table. Same with the water. It has to be purified, it has to be transported. It sometimes needs to be frozen, it sometimes needs to be boiled. All these things require energy at their heart. And so when you look at the broader context of the global sustainable development goals, universal access to clean water, sanitation services, healthcare, all these things, actually the prerequisite is having the energy to accomplish those tasks.
It is the golden thread.
It is the golden thread, and the biggest challenge is actually, we were mentioning this today in our conference, that to achieve all the other goals by 2030, energy has to be there first. Energy has to have been there by maybe 2025 to reach the universal healthcare goals and stuff by 2030. So it's actually a very urgent challenge, but we can get into this a little bit later. It's a challenge that's been addressed in countries like Canada and the US during the Depression and in the 20th century, and we can easily do it again now, but it takes a little bit of different approach.
Jatine, you wanted to follow up?
Build on a key point that Aaron is talking about, and this is a true tragedy here, and the statistics go something like this: about 4.4 million people in the world die annually because of lack of electricity access or because of bad cooking fuels and so on. And that mortality impact, World Health Organization statistics, are in fact larger than malaria, AIDS, and TB combined. So that gives you a sense of the connectedness to the health equation and energy access.
I actually, Jatine, have a quote from somebody who reflects the point you just made. This is from Discourse Media, along with the Waterloo Global Science Initiative, WGSI, recently launched a site called Power Struggle, and it's a global investigation into energy poverty. And this is a quote from Narbada Kumari Chaudhry from Nepal, who said, "Until 2 years ago, we used animal dung for cooking. We stopped using it after realizing that it was more detrimental to our health than firewood. Animal dung produced a lot of smoke, which hurt our eyes. Whenever the forest authorities allow us to collect firewood, my father, my sister, and I go to the forest. My younger brother has never done it. Collecting firewood takes a lot of time. Sometimes we spend a whole day on it." Talk to us, Hisham, about the connection between a lack of access to reliable power and good health.
Well, as Jatine mentioned, the global burden of disease estimates are about 4 million or so people dying prematurely every year as a result of the household air pollution that comes from cooking with these kinds of fuels. And when you look at who is most at risk, well, it's naturally, of course, it's women and it's children, because they're hanging around with mom in the kitchen. And so if you think of having a barbecue in your house, right, a wood, you go camping, you go light that fire, you build your nice fire, you're going to make your s'mores, right? Now take that into your house and then cook with that every day, day in, day out, right? And you can easily imagine how all that soot builds up, right? And it builds up not just on the walls, it builds up in your lungs, right?
But if you have access to wood, chances are it's free, so it's pretty hard to turn that down.
This is a big challenge that we face when we try to think about how people transition away from that energy source, right? Household energy choices are not made in an ideal world. They're made in a world in which people have to make hard decisions about how they spend their money. Do I spend my money on this fuel, which is going to be cleaner for me to burn in my house, but on the other hand, I need food for my kids that I'm not growing myself. I need to send my kids to school, right? I need to do a whole bunch of other things, right? And that wood over there, well, that's free. I pay for it with my time, but I don't pay for it with my money.
Let's pick up on that. Jatine, because this is a great point. Think of the time freed up, not having to spend 8 hours collecting firewood to cook if you had reliable power, right?
Absolutely. And I've said this often, you have to view access to electricity or high quality source of energy, in essence, as a liberating force of time, because in a certain sense, we're all born with a limited amount of time and we want to make the best out of it. And imagine that time being stolen away from you, and particularly the burden falls, and there's a gender question here on women and children. We are robbing them of time because we do not have electricity access or good quality energy access. And that just permeates their lives in ways, as I said earlier, educational attainment, any opportunity for cultural and social enhancement.
Let me find out from Kavita. Help us understand how energy poverty is related to gender and women's rights.
So to begin with, first of all, if you're relying on traditional forms of energy, what it means is, in terms of time expended just to collect those forms of energy for use, just like wood, for example, not only does it require a lot of time, like maybe 5-6 hours, or even the whole day, depending on where a person is collecting or what time of the year it is, the season. What traditional forms of energy do, they require so much more time to even do simple basic tasks like cooking, for example. So what a woman will do is, maybe for her entire house is one woman who's cooking the whole day, traditional style, maybe 6 to 8 hours. And other than just the time that you expend there, losing out on the opportunity to conduct a social life and have meaningful community ties, it also has very deep implications on your health as well. So we're looking at kerosene and firewood, which actually lead to mortality rates of mortality numbers of about 1.6 million a year.
This is 1.6 million people every year dying in India because of kerosene problems.
Because it's not just that, it's the toxic fumes.
And the fumes.
Yes, because where women traditionally cook, these are very closed little spaces. They're not large kitchens. See, the thing is, it is a gender problem as well. A kitchen is considered where the woman's going to stay, and they're not really big, huge spaces. They're not important spaces, so to speak. And so, yes, you do have a woman spending all her life there, and all her children spending their life, most of their days in the kitchen as well, and exposed to these sort of toxic fumes.
Hisham, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on another aspect of the gender problem, which is to think about how households make decisions and who makes decisions in the household, right? We know that it's primarily the women who are going out and doing the collecting, as Kavita said, and who are spending their time in the kitchen. As a result of that, it's generally not the women who are bringing in hard cash currency that can go and be spent either on electricity, but often, more often the case, not electricity, but other clean fuels like LPG and other types of liquefied petroleum gas, like propane, basically, type fuels, which burn cleanly in the house. But that costs money. And so you think about then who's making the decisions in the household, who's got access to the money. It becomes a real complex problem of thinking about how you move not just the women towards that, but the men. It's the men who often make those decisions, and they're the ones you have to convince sometimes.
We talked about women. How about the impact on kids? Let's talk about that. Here's Rabina Rumba, again from Nepal, another quote from Nepal, who says the following: I am in 8th grade at Sri Gita Middle School. I have a brother and 5 sisters. My parents are subsistence farmers. I feel happy for being able to study several hours in the evening. Until 8 months ago, we could only study for about an hour in the night. Now I can study till late night, doing my homework. I sometimes read my books under the light till 10 p.m. I am so happy now. Wow. The connection, Aaron, between electricity and education seems so obvious, but there it is, right?
Yeah, and it's a tremendous kind of potential multiplier when you talk about not having access to a computer in a school. You know, that student and tens of millions of students around the world are losing out on the opportunity to be able to participate in modern kind of commerce when we're talking about their educational opportunities from kindergarten up to 12th grade and beyond. The educational aspect, however, is one of a number of different community-based issues where we're talking about energy access in the healthcare context, et cetera. But of course, education is one of these fundamental things that can be impacted in a very meaningful way with just a simple light. And when we're talking about energy access, however, we have to realize that we're talking about a spectrum of different types of access, where it begins with that single light, and it goes all the way up to the wonderful energy access that we have here. And one of the things that we need to understand is that defining energy access is a very key component to solving this problem, because in some countries, they will define a community as having access when the substation is 6 kilometers away. There might not be a line going to that clinic or that household or that school, but that community has access according to the books. And so it's really important when we're talking about this to really make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Nkiruka, let's hear from you on this.
Yes, and also extending the conversation to small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. So we talk about women, we talk about children. Also, a lot of business owners cannot extend their business past sunlight hours when they have a simple light. They don't have simple electricity to run their business. And even when they get expensive and unreliable and dirty access to energy, their business costs more to run versus a different competitor that may have access to clean energy. So when they try to pull themselves out of poverty and to be self-reliant and to be independent economically, energy still impacts their efforts.
This is not a smart aleck question. Or let me rephrase that. This is not meant to be a smart aleck question. How did you get so smart you're now going for your PhD on 3 hours of access to electricity a day growing up in Nigeria?
Yeah, I grew up in Lagos, where the grid is very well extended.
Okay.
But some days we had full access to electricity, but many days out of a year we would only have 2 to 3 hours of electricity every day from the grid. So my parents had to rely on diesel generators. They're very expensive. So I was very fortunate to have parents who could afford diesel generators to light the house and allow me to study for hours past sunlight.
But they were noisy, right?
Very noisy, very polluting,
So
and
how do you study with all that
very
noise?
dangerous as well. You know, you get through it, and this is the resilience and the adaptability of human beings. In any situation that you find yourself, you try to survive and you try to overcome. And this is the story of millions of people across Africa. The ingenuity that they use to overcome energy problems is incredible.
Okay, let's go to the next segment here, which is one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as we've discussed, is to end energy poverty by the year 2030. That doesn't give us much time, actually, if we're going to get that done. How possible do we think this truly is? Aaron, I want to start with you. You're out of the UN right now, and then let's go along.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, we faced these problems before. In the 1930s in the United States, for instance, only 10% of rural America had access to energy. And with the creation of the Rural Energy Administration as part of the New Deal, within 20 years, that number had jumped to 90%.
Tennessee Valley Authority and things like that?
Exactly. And so what we've seen in the past, in particular, is that this massive hub and spoke energy infrastructure, as we call it today, where you have a centralized power generation with transmission lines going out, that's not kind of conducive to really quick, rapid expansion of infrastructure. It takes time. You have to go connect individual communities. It's much smarter to have a lot of different communities starting at the exact same time and to take a more decentralized approach. And you need both at the end of the day. But what we're seeing now is the kind of need to level the planning field, as we're talking about, where we say, basically, as engineers and policymakers have been educated in energy in the late 20th century, they've only really learned about this one model, which has dominated the 20th century, and that's that hub and spoke model. But we really need to reset our thinking to reach these universal energy access goals and kind of go back and look at what worked in our history and repeat that 20-year near universalizing energy access in the US around the world.
Well, Jatine, if we look back, that's 70 years ago in the United States, which of course had a booming economy, and it took 2 decades and the power of Franklin Roosevelt to make that all happen. Do we have those kinds of circumstances around the world today where we can get this done in 14 years?
I would like to think so, and I think it's a compelling enough argument coupled to the climate change question and decarbonizing the global energy system. We have to almost lay down a red flag at 2030 and say, how can we marshal collectively the scientific and technological capacity of all countries to really say, this is what we want to break. And if you do that, it's entirely achievable. Now, cynics will argue this is a big problem, it's a problem of governance, it's a problem of financing, it's a problem of this and that. And yes, indeed, it is a problem along each one of those lines. But unless you set yourself a very, very firm commitment to say it is unacceptable that we continue to bypass a third of humanity with this level of energy access, it will not happen. And so we need to focus on science and technology to get us there.
I have to think, though, Kavita, that the world has marshaled many of its resources to fixing this problem for the last many decades. And, by some estimations, not only are we not better off, we're worse off in some places. Why haven't things worked the way they should have so far?
So for starters, actually, you have to see that there are more people who need access to energy, and also our energy requirements are going up. You have TVs, you have a very ambitious lifestyle, you have computers, you have air conditioning, heating. As your standard of living goes up, your energy aspirations also go up. So of course, demand can't catch up with supply under those circumstances. But that said, I think goals like the SDG 7, while they're very ambitious, they should just...
Sustainable Development Goal 7.
Yes, Sustainable Development Goal 7. They're very, very ambitious, but if you're going to be pragmatic, let's treat it like a way station. So be like, all right, let's prepare ourselves in terms of infrastructure and institutions and the regulatory environment to actually then start working towards maybe a more realistic goal later in the future.
Hisham, can we get this done in 14 years?
Depends what you mean by get what done. Right, so the problem goes back to what Aaron was saying before. We have a whole spectrum of access to energy, from the light bulb through to the modern lifestyle we have now. So if we think about the fact that in that initial phase of people getting that first connection to electricity, they're actually not going to demand that much electricity. They can't afford the electricity, they can't afford the appliances to run the electricity. So their needs initially are modest. If that's what we're talking about, then yeah, I think we can get it done. Because you know what, it actually doesn't cost that much. Right? If you look at how much it might cost us to do that, it's less than 10% of what we spend on capital investment in the energy system globally right now.
You want to put a number on that?
Sure, it's something on the order of about $30-40 billion a year. Okay, that sounds like a lot of money. $30-40 billion a year between now and 2030 sounds like a lot of money, but we spend a lot more than that on a whole bunch of things, right? That is actually much less than we spend on energy subsidies for the oil sector and the gas sector every year.
Well, somebody will make the point. It's probably 5% of the U.S.'s annual defense budget. I won't
Right.
make the point. Somebody
Someone
else
else might make the point. So the point is, it's not an issue. The amount of money is not the problem, right? It's the political will, and it's setting up the political policy, regulatory systems in place that's going to be able to incentivize the people to. What we have now that we didn't have in that time period is we've got smart, dedicated, enthusiastic entrepreneurs and engineers and business people finding opportunities there at that market that exists to serve these people. But we need to let them go do that. And right now the systems aren't in place to help them do that.
In Kinuka, you more cynical or more hopeful about meeting this goal by 2030?
I'm more hopeful, and I really want to pick up on what my colleagues have said, that energy is not really a technological problem anymore. We have the technology, we have the expertise. It's a people problem.
Political.
It's a political problem, and it's particularly a people problem in terms of both the experts and the policymakers, right? So if you think of the people who are designing energy systems, and people have to deploy the systems in the regions that need them, we have to change our framework. We have to change the way we do research. We have to change the way we glean wisdom and traditional knowledge from the communities that we're going to. So the technology is there. The will is there. I think we need to really come up with the right practices and the right value system to create energy access by
We're going to
2030.
pursue and explore some reasons why there may be obstacles to getting there. But before we do that, we're a little more than halfway done here, so let's just do a little business with the people at home watching us. We want to remind you that we are here at the beautiful Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, Ontario, to take part in the Open Access Energy Summit. Our topic tonight, global energy poverty and how we can do it better. We've got 5 fantastic guests from all over the world joining us here in the Mike Lazaridis Theater of Ideas tonight. Aaron Leopold, UN Secretary General Sustainable Energy for All Initiative. Jatin Nathwani, Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy. Kavita Miles, Integrated Sustainable Energy and Ecological Development Association. Hisham Zarifi from the New Institute for Global Issues at UBC, and Nkiruka Avila from UC Berkeley. Let's get into that right now, and since you had the floor there, let's talk about what's preventing us from hitting that goal in 2030 to get more people access to reliable energy. Why is it not happening?
Well, first we can start with the governments, right? We need the political will in the governments for the government to say, this is my mandate. For 4 years, for 8 years, my mandate is to electrify the regions of my country. And particularly, we need partners in academia, we need partners in nonprofit organizations, and especially we need private partners. We need people with a lot of money, with a lot of incentives to invest in energy. We need these different stakeholders to work together and increase energy access in these regions.
Okay, that's politics. Jatin, I want you to follow up on not the political angle on this, but the technological/innovation angle.
Yeah.
Do we still need the big idea?
Let me say, let's not put all blame on governments, although governments have failed us in the past in a very significant way. To really change the equation here in terms of where we want to go and how perhaps we may be able to actually achieve these targets in some meaningful way, we really have to begin to think in terms of the technological innovations, understand that the cost-value equation, in fact, very small amounts of energy provide incredibly large amounts of value in terms of achieving key human development goals. So if we can take a tiered approach to the way energy services and provisions are provided to those who don't have it is one aspect of it. Secondly, it's almost the notion of what we call leapfrogging of technology in a certain sense, and it's something like this. If you think of the old telephone landlines that just were entirely inaccessible to a very large proportion of the population. There was a switch, the cell phones or the smartphones came along, and now they're ubiquitous in parts of the world that you could not have imagined a couple of decades ago. So then the question to ask is, what is it about energy technologies and the way we think about energy and how we provide those services that we cannot do something like that. And the reason I'm hopeful is the information communication technologies and its convergence with the developments of a range of energy solutions is where the promise lies, and I think it can be done, and we don't need to wait for the government to do that.
Hisham, let's explore that analogy a little bit. If you were going to make for energy the kind of analogy of no more landlines, everybody gets a cell phone,
Right.
what does that look like in terms of getting reliable power to everybody?
Well, I think we need to be very careful here about what we're talking about. First of all, we know that a lot of people who are going to get access to energy are going to get it through the grid, because that really will be the lowest cost option to meet those people who are already close to the grid, and it just needs to be extended to them. But the estimates are that that's only about half of the population that needs access to electricity. The other half are going to have to get it from some type of off-grid type solution.
Like what?
Like it can be solar home systems. It could be solar lanterns. It could be microgrids running on wind and other technologies as well as solar. It could be biomass gasification. It could be whatever that resources that exist. And it could be diesel, right? Let's not forget, diesel actually has been a powerful source of electrification. And in many places, it might be the least cost option. We have to think about that.
Kind of polluting though, isn't it?
It is kind of polluting. We can talk about that. But let's set that aside for a moment and just say, look, there's a bunch of technologies that are out there that depend on the resources that exist in the community. And so how do we make that happen? Right? We have to make that happen by creating a stable environment by which those people who can deliver those solutions can do so. That doesn't exist right now. Policy is uncertain. Regulations are uncertain. The financial sector doesn't want to invest heavily because of those kinds of things. We need to solve those problems in order to create the enabling environment to allow those people to do those kinds of
Nkiruka.
I want to add maybe an optimistic view to this. And in terms of the energy system in the United States, it's centralized. Everybody's connected to a centralized grid. And when we're talking about leapfrogging and we're talking about energy access in such a way that we're saying distributed systems can be the solution to energy access. But I even want to bring that conversation back home and talk about a place like California where the grid is very reliable, is relatively clean and green, but people still want to have decentralized energy systems. People want solar panels on their roofs. People want battery home systems. People want the Tesla Powerwall in their garage. So it's not even it's not always because of the energy access itself. People want a sense of independence and a sense of sovereignty when they're making their own energy choices. So places with very low access to energy have a great opportunity to leapfrog systems that in the United States we're trying to leave behind.
And Aaron, can I just understand how this works? I guess if you've got solar panels on your roof and they're really doing a great job, can you actually sell excess power to the grid so you're not only taking care of your own needs but also making a little money on the side too?
Yeah, you certainly can when the law allows for that, which is one of the points that Hisham was getting at. And I think one of the challenges that we're facing now is that it's actually illegal in many countries to be what's called an independent power producer. So you can have a solar panel on your roof, but as soon as you connect that to your neighbor or you connect that to someone else, you're now a power producer, an independent power producer. And that creates legal complexities. So one of the things that Practical Action, the organization that I work for, has done in the last couple of years is created this really interesting partnership called the Power for All Partnership, which we work with UC Berkeley on. And the main driver behind this partnership is to bring together civil society organizations, industry associations, and companies, which is a very kind of unholy alliance in many contexts, but to talk about exactly what Hisham was getting at, that we are basically at the precipice of a potential energy revolution, but it's really being held back in a number of ways. And the decentralized component is actually this missing link that we kind of know how to do, but we're not being kind of let alone enough to do it. And I'm not talking about kind of, everybody free-for-all sort of thing, but to really put the regulations in place that give especially financiers the security to know that in 20 years' time, the investment in this microgrid, which is expensive and it's semi-permanent, won't have been wasted because the grid will come and overtake everything, or that it suddenly becomes illegal once again. And this Power for All partnership is really talking about how these decentralized energies can deliver on the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 faster, cheaper, and better. And this is a message that I think many of us on the panel really feel quite strongly about, and that is kind of a key takeaway of a lot of what we've been discussing the last couple of days here.
Jatin, in your view, is this Go ahead, you wanted to follow
I
up?
want to build on what Aaron's
Sure.
saying, that we've talked about energy access as a problem and as a difficult situation. Let's think of it as an opportunity in the following way. So you don't have the legacy infrastructure in terms of stranded assets, of course, and so on. And so now if we build up the system at a decentralized scale in terms of really getting to the heart of the question of people who don't have it, that's one part of it. But if we do it smartly, then we will also have a big grid because of urbanization and so on. So the idea is that we need both the decentralized and the centralized, and we can allow them to function in a way that actually the decentralized energy system provides resiliency to the bigger grid. And as we're faced with threats of storms and what have you, that really is the positive way of looking at it, that here is a chance to not only provide access of energy to people who don't have it, but create a system that actually will be much
Here's where okay, I'm going to play a bit of a killjoy here, okay?
Absolutely.
Hisham, you ready for this?
Absolutely.
I cannot imagine that the big power producers are going to allow their billions and billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure to be undercut because somehow 10 years from now we figured out a way to make every homeowner in the state of California their own power producer. That's just not on. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're not wrong in the state of California. You're not wrong in a lot of other contexts. You are wrong, with all due respect, in a lot of places where the fact of the matter is the grid isn't just not going to get there, okay? There are tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of places in this world where the grid is just not going to reach on a timescale that is at all reasonable, okay? Now, in the places where the grid can reach, the microgrids are going to be there, you're going to see a struggle. You will see a struggle for domination and control and who gets to do it and who doesn't get to do it. But in those other places, you're not. The problem is distributed power generation is the poor stepchild of the electricity world, right? We've been, as Aaron noted so far, in this path dependency around the power grid, right? And so, but if we believe of electricity as providing all these amazing social benefits and social goods that we have to have equitably distributed among a population, then we shouldn't leave that aside as this sort of residual thing that somebody's going to take care of. The entrepreneurs will take care of it and somebody else will take care of it. No, we got to think about how we actually incentivize it proactively, deal with it proactively, and allow that leapfrogging to happen proactively, right? We can do that, absolutely. In some places, though, it will be a struggle, for sure.
And let me just understand that struggle a little better. Kavito, when for example, your work in India, if you don't listen to the community and its needs, and they are, after all, the experts, right? They're living it every day. How likely can you fix this problem?
Well, we can't actually, because first of all, there is so much resistance towards new technologies, straight up, and there is so much betrayal, a sense of betrayal by these community members against, like, in terms of what the government has done or not provided, right? So what you do need to do is leverage that diversity that you have in your hands. Look at more decentralized sources of power, something that will be acceptable to people, to the community members. And and that's a really important part of the process as well, is to find out what they want and what works for them.
I want to just explore this angle about the private sector a little more, and to do that, we have gone into the audience and we're going to talk to Sorin Grama. Now, are you originally from India?
No, I'm not.
Where are you from?
I grew up in Romania, but I moved to the United States when I was younger.
But you've spent how much time in India?
Spent the last 9 years working on his business, and the last 3.5 years actually living there with my family.
And now you're back where? Now you're in Boston.
I'm back in Boston, yes.
You're a Red Sox fan? Never mind, that's another show.
Yes.
You started a company called Promethean Power in 2007. And I'm trying to understand, and this had to do with life in India. What problem were you trying to solve with that?
Well, it was a problem that we had no idea about. When the first time I traveled to India in 2007, we had a meeting with the managing director at a dairy in Bangalore, and he was the first one to tell us about the issue he was having in collecting good quality milk from surrounding villages. The problem here is in India, unlike here in Canada or the United States, If you're a dairy processor, you want to collect milk, you don't have a dairy farm with 2,000 cows. You have 2,000 farmers with one cow. So if you want to go collect milk to process it into yogurt, pasteurized milk and butter and all that stuff, you have to go touch thousands of villages, literally hundreds of millions of farmers all around India that produce the small amounts of milk and bring it to a collection center from where it has to be delivered to a processing center or a chilling center.
That sounds problematic.
Very problematic. And imagine doing that twice a day, right? So milk is a very timely activity. The cows are milked twice a day, morning and evening, and you got to get that milk somewhere to a processing point within 5 or 6 hours before it spoils.
How did the lack of reliable energy affect this whole situation?
Well, there's a very easy solution to all the milk problems in India. I mean, it's been used in our country and all over the world for many decades. It's called refrigeration. But the problem with refrigeration is that we don't have reliable access to electricity in villages in India. So just when you need to chill the milk, because chilling milk actually solves everything. You can collect it once a day, you can keep it fresh, it reduces all that spoilage, but you need to have that energy, access to energy exactly at that time of the day when the cows are milked, which is morning and evening, and that doesn't happen very often.
And what's the temperature like?
Oh my God, it's 45 degrees.
45 Celsius
yes.
outdoors?
Yes.
As you're trying to keep milk chilled?
Yes.
Tough.
Tough,
Okay,
yes.
so what did you do?
So we spent a lot of time trying to understand the problem and sort of dig deep root analysis and trying to and we realized that we tried many things. In fact, we tried solar power initially to solve this, and we realized that solar power itself was unreliable. It was only available during the day and not so much available during the monsoon season. So it was a long journey, but in the end, we found a way to solve it using an energy storage device. We actually use the existing grid. The grid is available, it's just not available when we need it. So when it comes on, we quickly store that energy into a special battery that we developed.
How big?
I'm sorry?
How big's the battery?
It's actually pretty big, yeah. It weighs about a ton. It stores 100 megajoules of thermal energy. We basically make ice, so it's like technical term is a phase change material, but it's really ice. So as soon as power comes on from the grid, we run a compressor, we make ice, and that ice is basically energy. We store energy. When the power goes out, we have the ice to chill the milk. So we can melt that ice and we chill the milk, and particularly for a refrigeration application like this, it's ideal. We don't need to use electrical batteries with voltage. We just need to use this thermal battery that gives us cold energy, so to say.
Problem solved.
Problem solved.
Well
yes.
done, Serene. Thank you for joining us. That was great. Okay, let's follow up on that and see whether or not the private sector represents some possible solutions to all of what we've been talking about. Hisham, what do you say?
Absolutely. The governments cannot do this alone. The private sector has a huge role to play. What we have to be careful about is ensuring that as people are getting energy access, we're very cognizant of the fact that this costs different levels and that provides different levels of service, right? So how do we deal with the fact that some households are getting access through the grid at a highly subsidized rate, but if you're not so lucky to live near the grid, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to go have to buy a solar home system at the market price, right? So we need to find a way to harness the private sector as part of a national agenda of equitable electrification, right? That's the goal. Not the government does it. Can't happen. Not that way. Right? The government is there to enable, and that's what has to happen.
Well, let me follow up with Nkiruka, and I don't want to get you in trouble with any of the folks back home, but Nigeria is not known to be one of the most transparent, least corrupt countries in the world. I think, in fact, it's known as one of the least transparent, most corrupt countries in the world. In which case, how much of a problem is the government towards realizing this vision?
Yeah, I think it's been a big problem, and that's why I refer to energy as a people problem. I think Nigeria is a very rich country, has lots of natural gas, lots of oil, and lots of solar and wind and hydropower resources. But that energy has not been tapped to benefit the citizens of the country. So that's been a government issue, that's been a governance issue, that's been the government not prioritizing the needs of the people. And that has gone on for many decades, but now we have a new government that came into power last year. And the president and the vice president have spearheaded renewable energy investment. So I'm really seeing a change, an inflection point in Nigeria where the government is taking energy very seriously. They're seeing the impacts on the economic growth of the country, and they're really taking energy seriously. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of public-private partnerships and a lot of renewable energy development in Nigeria.
Aaron, where are governments getting it wrong?
they're getting it wrong in a few different ways, but they're starting to get it right in a few different ways as well. And one of the things that I mentioned before was kind of about providing that enabling environment for these new types of entrepreneurs. But another reason, or another way that they're getting it wrong, is that they're not really allowing for this bottom-up energy access planning that really would enable the building of energy access markets. Because as Hisham mentioned, initially demand for energy services in poor communities is going to be quite modest. But actually, energy planning needs to be more integrated with other planning, so with healthcare planning, with education planning, et cetera. And also with agricultural planning and with forestry planning. All that firewood for that cooking is actually deforesting, creating a huge carbon problem in terms of our climate change issues. And deforestation also destroys agricultural land because the water goes down, the water table goes down, et cetera. And so we look at energy again as that golden thread issue, and energy planning, therefore, needs to be a bit more holistic than it's been. And this is why Practical Action works a lot on building energy access markets, kind of a more holistic approach that is really part and parcel to what we feel is kind of what's needed moving forward, and we're trying to show examples of where that can work, and we're doing that in the cooking space, on mini-grids, with all sorts of different technologies. And now it's about, now that this is finally a global issue, which it wasn't even 5 years ago, getting the right people to pay attention to it. And that goes back to this Power for All initiative, where we're really trying to show these decision makers, like, what has changed? You know, people with masters, with MSCs in engineering that got them in the 90s know nothing about this stuff because it's all been in the last couple of years. And a lot of the entrepreneurs that Hisham mentioned as well, you know, they're popping up all over the place, but governments don't know what to do with them because this is brand new stuff, and it's quite exciting in that way. And I agree completely with Jatin that this is a tremendous opportunity, and we're right at the perfect time to take advantage of it.
Well, we're talking about the focus on the world tonight, but last night on our program, Jatin, we focused on the numerous indigenous communities in this country which don't have access to any reliable, affordable electricity. But it goes beyond that in Canada, doesn't it? It's beyond the indigenous communities. For example?
Well, the access question is deeper. It's much more problematic in many dimensions, and so how we actually invest and plan for in the infrastructure is tied up in intergovernmental issues and problems and so on. But what I wanted to get to was that the notion of what one might call innovative business models, building on Aaron's point, to get away from this question of theft or what we call non-technical losses of electricity. If there is ownership of the asset at the level, whether it's a community or at the dispersed sources, and a mechanism for organizing how it is produced and what the tariff rates are and how to make that business model a sustainable model is one way of getting at it. The real problems, as you started with Nikki, was the notion of theft or corruption. You can actually begin to tune that down with new ways of thinking about business models and how you charge and how you collect. And distributed energy sources give you an enormous potential for making that change now.
Well, let me raise another thorny issue, Kavita, which is you could probably burn a lot of coal and make a lot of people's energy problems disappear. But I'm not sure anybody in this room thinks that's a particularly good idea. Yes, it gets you reliable, cheap power, but it's going to pollute the hell out of the planet while we're at it. So what do we do about that?
Well, for starters, you have to look at renewables. Yes, we understand, but renewables do have a very long incubation period, right? That infrastructure takes a lot of time to build. And just other than that, we just don't have all the time that we need or the productive capacity to build what is required to give access, for example, to 600 million people in India who don't have regular energy access. They actually have no formalized energy access at all. They're dependent on their own resources. And yes, can I just say one thing about coal, though? We know in the near future, coal is still going to be one of the fuels of choice, and really it is more of a compulsion. There is no alternative, so we have to be quite realistic. I mean, we do understand, yes, it's a dirty fuel. But on the other hand, for example, India, we have large deposits of coal. So yes, as a matter of policy, it's not going to stop, but we can move towards phasing it out. And that's precisely what we're trying to do. Our policy, our plan for the next 3 years actually, is to build a lot of capacity in hydroelectrics and solar and wind. So yes, we will get there, but not right now.
Nkiruka and then Hisham.
I agree with building alternatives to coal. And the argument against coal is not only on a global level and talking about climate change. Coal can be very polluting in the local region it's produced. A lot of arsenic, a lot of heavy metals that come from the burning of coal that greatly affects the local people living around the mining and the power plant generation. So we think of climate change when we think of coal and greenhouse gases as a global pollutant, but it's much more deadly in the local regions.
And we see pictures from China all the time where they're building coal-fired generating stations at a rapid rate, and people can't walk the streets anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, Hisham.
So I'm going to be the contrarian, if you don't mind, because while I think there's wonderful reasons to move towards renewables for energy access, and while I think there's wonderful reasons to move away from coal, and climate change is a real pressing, urgent problem, it's not as much an issue when it comes to electricity access. The fact of the matter is the vast increases in energy from coal that are going to come as developing countries develop are not going to be moved towards electricity access. Therefore, the broader economic development of the country, factories, and these kinds of things. If you do the calculation and you look at that modest amount of electricity people want initially, and you were to give it to them magically right now at the dirtiest technology that you can think of, you would raise CO2 global emissions by about 2%. Okay, it's not there. It's not where the problem is, right? And my concern is the more we think about, say, climate change, oh my God, giving electricity access is going to cause this huge climate change problem, the more we disincentivize falsely action on solving the energy poverty, energy access problem.
So get them hooked up first, then we can worry about cleaning up?
Yeah, absolutely, because the hookup is small, right? In India, if you want to electrify everybody in India at that modest rate, you're increasing India's coal capacity by about 2, 3, 4%. Right? It's not going to be the big thing there. Yes, their needs are going to grow, and you're going to have to deal with that in the future. But right now, I'd rather get that kid a light so that he can read at night.
Nkiruka.
Even as we're getting people their first kilowatt of energy, I think the solution you're talking about is a centralized solution, because coal cannot be done distributed.
Oh no, absolutely. When we're talking about the centralized grid, absolutely. When we're talking about the off-grid world, my environmentalist colleagues don't like me, but if for a particular community the cheapest thing to do is diesel, I'm sorry, but that kid needs light. If diesel is the way they're going to go, then they make that choice. I'm not going to argue against them.
But a lot of recent research has showed that coal is not the cheapest option. Because of the falling prices of solar PV, coal is not the cheapest option in the centralized systems and distributed systems. And so if you build a coal system, you have long legacy of having coal. You can't have a coal plant for 5 years. You're going to have it for 20, 30, 40 years. And so if you're thinking of a long-term vision, coal is not really the place to start.
Yeah, and I said there's lots of good reasons to do renewables. Climate change is not it. Yeah. If the renewables are cheaper, hey, go for it.
You know what? I hate to cut off a program when we're having a really good fight here, but that's our time. We're out of time. Can I thank all of our guests for being on the program tonight? It was just a delight to meet all of you, and thanks so much for your help on this. Aaron Leopold, who's with the Access Committee of the UN Secretary General Sustainable Energy for All Initiative, Jatin Naswani from here at the University of Waterloo, Kavita Miles, Senior Program Coordinator of the Integrated Sustainable Energy Ecological Development Association. What's that acronym called? How do you say that?
INSETA.
INSETA, there we go. Hisham Zarifi from the University of British Columbia, and Nkiruka Avila, PhD student, University of California, Berkeley. How about a Waterloo thank you for all of our guests today? Thank you so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.